All right. Welcome back, everybody. This is Dr. Greg Eckel and What the Health. We have a fascinating topic today, understanding viruses and vaccinations with the world-renowned Dr. Thomas Cowan. He's accomplished author, speaker, and holistic health expert, challenges the norms. His 6 best-selling books, including The Contagion Myth, Cancer and the New Biology of Water, revolutionized thinking. As a founding board member of the Weston A. Price Foundation, he champions natural healing. He's armed with a Duke biology degree and a Peace Corps experience. He earned his medical degree, practiced successfully, and now shares insights. His empowering strategies reveal the transformative potential of holistic health based on new biology principles. Welcome aboard.
Okay, thanks. And you can call me Tom.
All right, I will call you Tom. So you have been at the forefront of new thought. I'm curious what you mean by the new biology.
Oh, that's a good question. So the old biology, in contrast, has a has a number of principles and dictums and axioms that are because of a certain methodology of going about studying life. The fundamental problem with it is because science, at least since 150 years, and medicine has no idea the difference between living systems and dead systems. Therefore, they study living systems as if they were chemistry sets. And as a result of that, they make mistake after mistake. And the other thing that's happened is people have decided, I guess you could use that word, that they can substitute models for reality. And that creates all sorts of problems, which we can get into. And the final broad thing that happened is somehow science forgot that the way that you find something has a huge determinant of what you will find. And so we pretend in science, which is now more of a religion and a belief system, that it doesn't matter how you found something, or even if the what you find conforms to the known principles of the everyday world. So let me just give you an example of this.
Please.
So one of the important things in modern biology, modern science, and medicine, because it has a lot to do with the so-called mRNA vaccine, is that we're made of cells, which itself is a iffy proposition, and I can get into that.
Yeah.
But the cells have organelles, one of which is called a ribosome. And the ribosome is important because it takes the mRNA and translates it into protein. So we are essentially made of like living protein. And so the place or the mechanism that protein is made is a hugely important function of living systems. So they say that the mRNA, like the mRNA, quote, vaccines, are translated into proteins in the ribosomes. Now, here's the first problem with that. They say that each protein is made from one gene, and then they do the arithmetic and find out there's approximately 200,000 proteins and 20,000 genes. And apparently geneticists didn't study arithmetic in school, because that would mean there's 180,000 proteins that are unaccounted for by genes, which means that theory, which is the basis of genetics and genetic diseases, has to be incorrect.
So let me make sure, I'll just reiterate. So one gene creates one protein.
That's what they say.
If you just do simple math, there's 180,000 proteins that are not accounted for that.
Yeah, there's no code.
Yeah. Got it.
Now they get around that by saying something rearranges the genes so then you can get another 10,000 or whatever.
Hmm.
But they also say that the DNA is the same in all the cells, even though that's been proven to be not true. And this DNA is stable, even though that's been proven to be not true. But getting back to the ribosomes. So
Yes.
the only way that a ribosome has been seen is under an electron microscope. It's supposedly too small to see it in a light microscope.
Mm.
Now, if you understand how a picture is taken in an electron microscope, uh, it's taken by taking the tissue, grinding up in a blender, freezing it to 150 degrees centigrade, extracting it with acids, putting heavy metals on it, shooting an electron beam at it, so called. High intensity voltage is what it is.
Hmm.
And then it dehydrates the materials into a powder, and then you see the stain. Now, if I said to you, Greg, I want to find out what your hand is made of and what it does, and I'm going to cut it off your arm, and then I'm going to grind it up in a blender, and I'm going to freeze it to 150 degrees, and then I'm
Right.
going to soak it in heavy metals, and then I'm going to dehydrate it into a powder, and then I'll know what your hand does and what it's made of.
Right.
You
Yeah. It's
buy that?
absurd. It's absurd. Yeah.
Okay. And then to make it even more absurd, every picture of a ribosome ever published, I've checked, is a perfect circle.
Hmm.
Now, that means since it's two-dimensional, that it must have been a sphere in real life, right?
Right.
Now, remember that one of the steps was grinding it in a blender. Now, imagine you had an orange, right? That's a sphere, more or less. And you put it in a blender, dehydrated it, etc. What are the chances that every piece of that orange would be a perfect circle?
Yeah. Very slim.
No, zero.
Yeah.
So that can't be. And in fact, it has been proven because uh, somebody did this experiment, a guy named Harold Hillman, that these are gas bubbles.
Hmm.
And that's why they're perfect circles, because all gas bubbles are basically spheres.
Yeah.
And there is nothing called a ribosome. It's a make believe, which
Where did
means
it come from?
it came interesting. It's a good question. You know what the word means?
No.
Rib, right?
Yeah.
RIB.
Yeah.
That means of. Soma. Well, you know what a soma is?
The muscle,
Body.
the body.
Okay, so a ribosome, the place where our proteins are made, came from the rib of the body.
Huh.
You ever hear that expression before?
No.
Yes, you have. Adam and Eve.
Oh, the rib of an apple. There you go.
No, the rib of
Rib of the
the
body.
woman
Yeah.
was made
Yes.
from the. So
You're
they're
right.
mocking you
Yeah.
because they know that the the story is that life was made from the rib of somebody else. So
Mm,
they just use that word to
the
mock you.
ribosome. Wow.
Now,
Well, it
that
makes me,
means
yeah. Go ahead.
that means we don't know where the proteins are made. And in
Yeah.
fact, there is no structure that makes the proteins. And so how the heck does this whole thing work?
Yeah.
And I I could get into that, but it's more important, I think, if we only have like 25 minutes to say when you do this, you end up with essentially debunking modern science and biology and medicine. And so that's the old biology. So you
Got it.
throw that away,
Yeah.
and then you start having to say, okay, well, what is there and how does it work? And how does that affect whether we're healthy or not? Now,
Right.
you could do the same thing with viruses. It turns out
Let's.
that if you said, I mean, if I asked you, Greg, how do you know there's such a thing as a hammer?
How do I, because that's what I've been taught. I have a
No,
hammer. I
see,
have evidence. You actually have it. You have it in your hand. You can see it.
okay, how about this? You go to the place you would think you would find a hammer, like a toolbox. You look in it, you pull out the hammer, And then you say, now I have a hammer. I know there's such a thing. And
Yeah.
then if you want to find out what it does and what it's made of, you can analyze it and hit a nail and see if it makes the nail go in.
Yeah.
That sound right?
That sounds right.
How about a frog?
You go to where you think you'll find a frog, get a
Like a
frog,
pond.
like a pond, body of water. You look for a creature that looks like a frog. You see if it
Yeah.
croaks. Yes.
Yep. You get a net. So the only difference between the frog and the hammer is how you catch it.
Right.
One, you use a net, the other, you just stick your hand in.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's called the proving the existence, the isolation, meaning you take the frog out and you have only the frog. And then you can analyze it and see what a frog does. It jumps or goes ribbit or catches flies or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's called logical, rational thinking. Now, I'm here to tell you and anybody's listening that if you go to the ecosystem where you'd expect to find this organism called a virus,
Yeah.
right? Like a sick person or a herpes blister or a chickenpox blister,
Yeah.
nobody in the history of medicine has ever found a particle called a virus in that fluid. Nobody. And we have approximately 220 institutions, NIH, CDC, Robert Koch Institute, Pasteur Institute. We
Yeah.
asked them, show us a paper that shows this thing, this, protein code, DNA, RNA inside, spikes, all that,
Yeah.
directly in the biological fluids of a sick person or animal. They said, we don't have such a thing.
Hmm. Well, so would this be a, kind of an extension of like Koch's postulates of like that's how they define a virus now? As you take saliva or bodily excretion, grow it in a medium, and that's how they're proving like, look, there's an organism here.
Okay, so let's dissect that. And
Yeah.
I don't want people to get hung up by Koch's postulates. I want them to think like rational, sensible human
No,
beings.
I agree. And so you have
Okay,
that, you have that somewhere on your website that you've asked them that and they can't come up with a
a woman
definitive
named
paper.
Christine Massey has asked in writing, Freedom of Information Act. We've
Yeah.
asked 220 institutions. They say in writing, we have no such paper. I've asked virologists, medical doctors, scientists.
Right.
They say you can't do it like that.
Aha.
So how do they isolate it? Because there's 10,000 papers called the isolation of SARS-CoV-2,
Yeah.
isolation of herpes virus, etc. So let me
Yeah.
walk you through that stage and you tell me whether the word isolation means like the frog and the hammer,
Yes. Yeah, you have the thing.
separate one
Yeah.
thing from
Right.
everything else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's how they isolate a virus. They take the sputum or secretions or bodily fluid of a sick person. They don't know why they're sick. They just have a
Yeah.
cough.
Culture. Yeah.
So they take that. They don't look for a virus. They put that on a culture with monkey kidney cells.
Mm.
They add antibiotics, which are toxic to the kidneys. They take away the nutrient medium from the kidney cells. They add the serum from a fetal calf, and they add other chemicals. And then if the kidney cells break down, which by the way have been proven to break down by adding antibiotics or taking the nutrient away
Way.
or
Yeah.
from fetal calf serum depletion, if the kidney cells break down, that is called the isolation of the virus.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you?
No.
That's how they do it.
That's how they're doing.
That's that's the
Huh.
proof that there's a herpes virus.
Hmm.
That's the proof that there's a SARS-CoV-2. There is no step in that process which actually found the virus. Now, by the way, we, meaning a group that I'm associated with, decided to do this entire procedure called the viral culture,
Yeah.
except we didn't add anything from a sick person.
Mm.
We just added, we took Vero cells, that's monkey kidney cells, added antibiotics, same concentration, added the same chemicals like trypsin, which breaks down kidney cells. We took away the nutrients. We used the same fetal bovine serum. It broke down exactly the same way, proving that you don't need a virus to cause the breakdown of the cells.
Mm.
That proves that that method is never been able to prove that a virus exists, because the cytopathic effect, meaning the killing of the cells, and everybody should listen to what I'm about to say, is not a proof the virus exists. It's the proof.
Right. That's
And if
the only way.
that's
So
the
what
only way.
how are they differentiating or then saying this is herpes, this is COVID, this is,
They
cytomegalovirus?
take that breakdown product, right, of the cells, and then they start sequencing, finding the pieces of RNA or DNA, or
Mhm.
mixing it with different antibodies, or looking at different proteins, and then they claim that that means it's a different virus. Now, here's
Mhm.
an interesting one. A guy named Hans Gelderblum was one of the most famous HIV researchers ever. So he did a study where he took essentially AIDS patients, supposedly caused by HIV, right?
Yeah.
So he took the T lymphocytes of an AIDS person, and he spun it down, analyzed all the proteins, and said there's 25 or so proteins in it. These are the HIV proteins because it spun out at the HIV virus
Mm.
band,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So these are the 25 proteins. And then he did a normal person who didn't have AIDS, otherwise healthy, normal T cells, spun that down, got the same band, did the same protein analysis, same 25 proteins,
Ha!
proving
Same
that there
25
are no
proteins.
different proteins uh, that would be connected to a virus in a quote infected T cell.
So what is the process that we're seeing?
What process are you talking about?
The illness. People
So
that are ill.
people need to realize that I didn't just say that people don't get sick, right?
Right.
People get sick,
Yeah.
but in no case ever, and I will bank my whole career on that,
Yeah.
has a virus ever been found to be the cause. So the first question one has to ask is, for instance, AIDS, is that one disease?
Right.
I mean, some people they waste away. Some people have Kaposi sarcoma. Some people have different kind of lung problems. Is that the same disease?
No.
Some people with COVID, so-called,
Yeah.
have lose their smell. Some people have nothing, right?
Right.
Some people have hypoxia. Some people have pneumonia. Some people get sick for a week. Other people supposedly get sick for a year or more.
Right.
Is that the same illness?
It doesn't sound like the same illness.
Right. Now, even if you get into things like rheumatoid arthritis, like people have joint pains and swelling and all that. Now, here's the interesting thing in the old biology. The hallmark, the pathognomonic signature of rheumatoid arthritis is elevated antibodies,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Now, because they say this is an autoimmune disease, the antibodies are attacking your joints, etc. Greg, you know how many studies there are that show that purified antibodies have ever hurt any person or animal?
There aren't any.
There aren't any.
There aren't
So,
any.
so, so that is a wild hypothesis. Now, here's the next.
You know, what's interesting on that?
Let me
So,
say one more
yeah,
thing here.
okay,
You
yeah.
know how many people have the exact same symptoms, joint pains, bilateral, et cetera, and have no positive antibody?
I'm sure there's probably equal
40%.
30,
40%.
40%.
That means, so on what basis
Yeah,
would you say that the pathology in this illness is from the antibodies? On
yeah,
what basis would you say this is one disease?
yeah.
And
Yeah, I
here's
mean,
final
clinically,
one,
okay,
measles,
one more.
right?
Yeah,
Cold, mucus, etc. But the hallmark is white spots in the cheek called
yeah,
complex spots.
yeah.
You know how many, I looked it up. You know how many people have the same symptoms and say they have measles but don't have complex spots?
I don't.
30%.
30%.
So that's like saying,
Yeah,
Greg, I got this farm on my property and I got these animals and they have feathers, right? And they
yeah,
go like this and cluck cluck. And then I have these other ones. These are chickens, and they go meow and they walk. They have a tail and walk.
yeah.
And so, what are those? Are non-feathered chickens.
Right,
We
right.
don't talk like that,
Yeah,
except doctors.
right.
That's how they talk.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't interrupt you.
Well, so on just on the antibody load, like, a lot of physicians are tracking antibodies for certain viruses that clearly don't exist, and they're linking that to severity of symptoms, and I've never seen that to be true. Like, you cannot track somebody's well-being or levels of illness on antibody load. All it's saying is, in my mind, is that the immune system has reacted to something.
There
um,
is no immune system. That's the old biology.
there's no immune system. All
They
right.
made up the immune system to make you think you had a virus.
Okay.
Here's the way it worked. They said you have to follow the thinking of how they do this. So, Greg, if you get exposed to this measles virus, then you get measles.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. I got exposed to the same people.
Right.
I
You
didn't
didn't
get
get it.
sick.
Right.
Why is that? So now
Your
you have to do
terrain.
you
Right.
have to do a reification fallacy.
Mm.
You say, well, that's because you have an immune response.
Well, the naturopathic discussion is, well, your terrain was better, right? This was the debate by
Yeah,
Louis
but the
Pasteur and
convent,
Marcel Beauchamp. Right.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But they still say, well, it's your immune system,
Got it.
meaning
That was
your
stronger.
antibodies.
Got it. Yeah.
It's they say that if you get this an illness once and you never get it again, that's because you're immune to it,
Mm.
right? In
Yeah.
other words, if something happens to you once, like you get hit by lightning, 98% of the people who get hit by lightning only get hit once. That's because they're immune to lightning.
They're immune to lightning. Right. Right.
Not only that, but I've looked, about 85 or so percent of the people who get divorced only get divorced once. That's because they're immune to divorce. Except, of course, if they cheat on their wife and then they lose their immunity and
Uh-huh.
then they get divorced again. Just like if you lose your immunity to chicken pox, then you get shingles.
Mm.
Now, here's where it gets even goofier. They say that if you get a virus and then you make antibodies, that means you're immune to the virus.
Right. So
And
that's the
then,
whole premise of vaccination.
right, that's the whole premise.
Yeah.
Now, along came 1984, and
Hmm.
they get all these people dying of AIDS.
Yeah.
And then they say, we announce we found the cause, it's a virus.
Mm.
How do they know? Because they found elevated antibodies in their blood of some of them.
Mm.
Now, I remember that's the year I graduated medical school. I remember hearing Robert Gallo say that. So I spent 4 years learning that if you had antibodies, you were immune.
Mm.
And this yo-yo just told me that if you find antibodies,
Now
that
you
means you're
have
going
it.
to die.
Yeah. Right.
And I thought, what the fuck? Who
Yeah.
changed the rules?
Right. Right. New
And
definitions, new discussion. Yeah.
and you know why that is? That's because the HIV is a smart virus. So
It's retrovirus.
it
Yes.
knows how to escape your
Ah,
immune system.
right.
Unlike measles, that's a stupid virus.
Yeah.
Now, the flu virus is sort of a medium smart because it changes every year, and that's why you
Okay.
need a new flu shot every year.
So talking through this, so how, like, let's just talk about polio with vaccination, right? What is the backstory there? Was it already on the decline, or what was there something in the ingredients of the vaccine that they put? Because that was kind of the great trumpeted victory of public health and vaccination. When you,
Right. So
yeah.
uh, I have 70 studies that show that there was no uh, contagiousness in the disease called polio. But here you have to realize another great trick that all the medical doctors use to essentially back up the use of vaccines.
Mm,
So the definition of polio before the vaccines was anybody who had an acute illness like a respiratory or GI symptoms and had paralysis for even a day or more.
mm.
Then they do the vaccine, and then they change the definition of polio to an acute illness, and you have to have paralysis at least 3 to 6 months. And since approximately 97% of the people who got polio diagnosis got better in 3 to 6 months, anyways,
Mm.
so now you have a 97% less incidence of the disease. And then you do another thing, which is that do you know what acute flaccid paralysis is?
Acute, just like it sounds.
Yeah, 500,000 cases in India in the last 7 years.
Mm,
That means you have an acute illness and then you get paralysis. And that is exactly the definition of polio. But
mm.
the polio incident went down and acute
Oh,
flaccid paralysis went
went
up.
up. Huh.
Went way up. And in fact, there was more cases in the last 7 years of acute flaccid paralysis after the polio vaccine campaign than there ever was of
Mm.
polio before the vaccine.
Well, and that's a piece of why the Gates Foundation was asked to leave India as well, because that was a part of their campaign. Is
Well,
that
so another what happens is they change the definitions.
yeah,
So in the beginning, like that you had Kaposi sarcoma and you had malnutrition because you took poppers, 20
yeah,
times in a week, and you had anal sex with 100 people in 2 weeks, and you didn't eat, and you took antibiotics, and
yeah.
you were socially ostracized, and you did a whole lot of other things, and so you were starving. So it used to be you had starving, you had lymphoma, you had Kaposi sarcoma. All those became AIDS.
Mm,
So now you have an increased incidence of the disease. And
yeah.
then if it's a vaccine situation, as soon as
Solution.
they get the vaccine, they say, now you don't have AIDS, you have Kaposi sarcoma, and
Ah,
you have lymphoma, and you have, so
just
that's what happened with
shuffling.
polio.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened with polio is there were two known neurotoxic agents, lead arsenic and DDT,
Mm,
and they affect the anterior horn cells of the nervous system, which is the seat of the motor neurons, so called, which are
hmm.
not motor neurons, but that's a whole nother story. But if you poison that area, you get paralysis.
Mm,
So they at the same time stopped the spraying of apple trees and other fruit trees with lead arsenic. Used to concentrate in the sugar. That's
yeah.
why people who ate more sugar tended to get more polio. So they
Mm,
took it out of the sugar, stopped using DDT, and sent it to India where so they could get polio. And that's how they got rid of polio.
ah,
It had nothing to do with the vaccine.
wow.
And I don't know if you have, same with smallpox. There's never been a vaccine that prevented one illness ever. It
Yeah.
can't possibly because antibodies are not there to protect you in the against a virus. They're repair proteins. So if you get injured, you're like with Kaposi sarcoma or starving, you make more antibodies
Mm.
to try to repair your tissue. And then if you get better, your antibody load will decrease. It has nothing to do with the etiology of the illness.
I'm sure the establishment loves you with this truth telling. The component, what you in the new biology, it does make me think of Gilbert Ling and the cell structure, gel cells, and the powers of life, I think is the title of the book. I just maybe just murdered it, but these basic premises that we've made in and built these institutions on, um, when you actually push on the foundation, you realize there's not the evidence that we think is there. And then you bring up this concept of the religious nature of science, and what we don't have true science besides folks that are actually thinking rationally and actually objectively about what's going on. Like, I'm sure you've been called all kinds of names, discredited, blah blah blah, but when you actually look at the science, it's telling us something different. So that's super fascinating, and I want to continue this discussion. I also want to give our listeners, viewers, some actionable item out of this, because I think that that's paradigm blowing. Maybe there's cognitive dissonance happening for folks of like, what are they talking about? They're saying these specific beliefs that have been drilled into us potentially aren't true. I'm just asking folks on this show to get curious. I think curiosity is the foundation of science, and then you can prove it out in your own life, like run some experiments. Doesn't mean you have to become a bench chemist or culturing cells in your kitchen. But I'm wondering, what do you do, Tom, where you like, because I'm sure you've had this conversation for decades now and really refined it well. So what's the step for people? What's an actionable item here?
So that's a good question. And here's the thing that changed my life, and I think will change people's life. And I will say it and then give you an example. The essence of science, as opposed to the belief in science or scientism,
Yeah.
or the essence of rational, logical thinking, it is it's sort of encapsulated in the principle that what happens is there are claims made, and you investigate the veracity of the claim without having to offer a different opinion about what is true.
Mm,
And if you just stick to that principle, you will learn so much more and you will be so much further ahead. And let me give you an example that I think will tell people what I mean by that. If you've ever investigated why clouds form and how rain falls, etc., it's very complicated because the water is heavier than the air. So why doesn't it fall down? And there's got to be these principles of sticking the floating water together, and it's really complicated. So somebody comes along with a claim, which is, I know why there's rain. There's these floating elephants in the sky, and they pee down, and that's what we call rain. So here's what you do. You say, how high up are the elephants? A mile.
yeah.
What color are the elephants? Gray. What's the density? Well, there's about 3 per square mile. And then you get all the details about the elephants, right? And then you get an airplane or a helicopter and you go up with 10 different places there's rain. You look, you don't see one elephant. You therefore conclude that the claim that the reason for rain is elephants is incorrect.
Right.
You don't know why there's rain still.
Right.
And you don't have to venture an opinion, just say, I don't know.
Right.
But if you do that process, you will find more and more things in your life that are not true that you can discard. And if you can keep yourself from saying, well, so what causes chickenpox? Forget it. Just say, is there evidence of a virus? Answer no. For I know that's not true. Is
Right.
there evidence of this? I know that's not true. Then what I have seen with myself and everybody that I've convinced to do this is the magical principles of the world will come in and help you out and show you what actually is true.
Mm.
But if you don't do the first step, if you remain delusional and a sort of cult member of scientism, you will never get that magic and see what's actually right.
Wow, beautifully put. Beautifully put. The are there groups of thinkers that are doing that? Like people must
I mean,
gather
I'm
together.
part of a group
Yeah.
that I formed the group. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and we hold ourselves to, we don't need to know what is true. I mean, it's interesting, you can
Yeah.
come up with theories or hypotheses, but it's like the Wizard of Oz. You get rid of everything that's not true. At the end of the day, you're back home in Kansas.
What's
It
the name of
always
that group?
works.
Is that the new biology curriculum? Is that the one?
That's where I'm sort of quote teaching people. I don't like that word, but I'm
Okay.
helping. So we set up a new biology clinic where all the practitioners are treating people along these principles, and then we have this curriculum where practitioners and others come to learn, you know, are there viruses? Is there genetics? What is DNA? Are the chromosomes made of DNA? The answer is no. Do DNA, is that our hereditary material? Answer is no. But how do I know that?
Yeah.
So there's lectures, there's things to read,
Cool.
there's the group discussion, and it's to this principle. How do you know that?
Yeah.
Is that claim you just made, you know, proteins are made on ribosomes. That's a claim.
Yeah.
You don't have to know where the protein is made now. You
Right.
just know that it's
Just
not on
is
the
it
ribosome. They don't
ribosome?
exist.
They don't exist. So I want to really I'm going to invite you back on the show, and I want you all that have made it this far in our interview. I want your questions down below. I'm going to consolidate them, and this is new information for so many people. We've got the propaganda boxes talking about viruses and the genetic codes, etc., and it is scientism. When you ask or get curious around these questions, like Gilbert Ling's career was shattered, he was ostracized, he was pushed out. You have when people actually come up with new thought, which is actually more true than the old thought, um, they're ridiculed, they're shunned, they're pushed out until it becomes, those radical thoughts then become the new known. And so I think this is a super fascinating conversation and very important. I've always talked to my patients that I don't treat disease. We treat whole dynamic heart-centered beings moving through time and space. Now you can debate the time and space component, but we treat people. I'm not interested so much in a disease process. So we're going for health and aligning towards that resonance or that field that creates health. That's our original blueprint. And I've seen
Yeah.
it 23 years in practice. I can speak more and more confidently in that because I've actually have clinical evidence to support it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Like we see people
There's
and we're
no disease. You're treating people.
right. We're treating people.
Right.
And so,
Trying to see
yeah,
if you can make their life better. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So I'm going to put some notes at the bottom here, Tom, and we'll pick up where we left off. But I really want to thank you for coming on What the Health. Do you want to share anything with the listeners and viewers here at the end?
I mean, that my people always tell me I got to tell them about if you want to get, have access to a practitioner who's working along these lines, we have the New Biology Clinic. All these are at drtomcowan.com.
Perfect. And we're
And
going to put all of that stuff in the show
yeah, and if
notes
you
on
want
our
to learn
raffles.
more, there's the curriculum, and it's a, like a, I don't know how many,
It's
3-month learning process.
okay. 3 month, you said?
I don't know, something
Okay,
like,
something like that. Self-paced, and it's
yeah,
a
right,
quarter, let's say.
yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And as I said before we got on, it's just a pleasure to meet you. I've really enjoyed your work, and keep up the good work, Doc.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, indeed.